President Trump and Xi Jinping have agreed that they want to see the war in Ukraine come to a close. But is that the easiest thing to agree on when it comes to finding out how to end the war? And does Vladimir Putin have his own ideas? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. But before we do, of course, you guys know there's 1 day left of the Strike Gum Fall Sale. Buy 2 of anything, get a 3rd free. Add 3 to your cart. You'll see the discount applied. There's no code or nothing. But strikegum.com, 90 milligrams caffeine in every piece, 100 milligrams alpha GPC. That's as much as an energy drink, as much as a one of these, right? A brand who we shall not name. If you want to stop spending $5 pop on these and start spending a fraction of that to get the equivalent of 5 energy drinks worth of boost with no sugar, no carbonation, no grossness, strikegum.com, no doubt about it. Okay, so following their meeting in South Korea, Trump and President Xi Jinping have pledged to work together to end the war in Ukraine. Now, what's notable is that both of these sides are on opposite sides of the conflict, with President Trump, of course, sort of kissing Putin's ass, but sometimes helping Ukraine, but then sometimes going back to kissing Putin's ass. Very weird. Beijing has been much more consistent. It is said officially that it's neutral in the war, but it supplies Moscow with dual-use goods, including literally hundreds of thousands of kilometers of fiber optic cable, the essential ingredient that makes Russian drones unjammable. And has been purchasing Russian oil, an incredibly valuable lifeline to the Kremlin's war effort. It's also been providing consumer goods to the average Muscovite, the average Russian who desperately needs, consumer goods to maintain their quality of life and lifestyle in the wake of the massive sanctions hitting the Russian people. So to Vladimir Putin, China feels very firmly on his side, and China fairly clearly sees that. Remember, North Korea is a Chinese vassal state. It exists, and the regime in North Korea persists only because of tremendous Chinese support. And that country has provided direct military support, literal soldiers fighting in Ukraine. So the idea that China is some sort of neutral party is preposterous, right? So Trump says, we talked about Russia's war in Ukraine for a long time, Trump told reporters. Quote, we agreed the sides are locked in fighting, and sometimes you have to let them fight, crazy, but Xi is going to help us and we're going to work together on Ukraine. Not a lot more we can do, which is crazy, right? Because again, the idea that like Trump says, oh, we want to see peace, but also we got to let them fight. Now, an extensive fight, actually, most analysts agree, is the outcome that China wants the most. Why? Because it is one, evolving the Russian military to become more effective at fighting NATO countries, right? NATO tactics, NATO gear. And the longer the fighting goes on, the better the Russians get at it. And in turn, that knowledge is going to go over to the North Koreans and the Chinese. In fact, some reports indicate that Chinese military observers are currently actually in Russian command headquarters watching kind of how the Russians navigate a fight, again, against a NATO-trained and equipped enemy. The other reason it benefits is because it is draining global resources away from the West, right? When China maintains that when the West, particularly Europe, provides military assistance to Ukraine, and that is draining their ability because high-end systems are very hard for European countries to replace. They don't really have the ability to scale up manufacturing. This is not necessarily the case in the United States, where almost all of the aid we've provided to Ukraine has represented like something like 2 to 3 cents of each dollar we spend on the U.S. military, and almost all Ukrainian gear has been old stock that the U.S. was already going to dispose of or sell, and is being replaced by higher end stuff, right? The F-16s, for example, are something like 20 to 25 years old in terms of their avionics. The up-to-date, they're called like Block E's or whatever, are vastly superior in terms of the software and firmware inside them. And so the idea for China is that they want to see a sort of battle fatigue among Western nations, as well as a physical drain on resources. China also benefits from protected fighting because the longer it goes on, the more China gets to build up its industrial base for this unique method of war against the West. Particularly for China, its the most important Russian tools in this war are long range and short range drones. And those are made almost entirely in China, right? Sometimes final assembly is done in Russia. But for China, they say, listen, the fact that we own the global ability to produce quadcopter drones means that if the American forces were to attempt to, say, repel a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, well, those American forces would likely encounter swarms and swarms of FPV drones because China is already literally years and years ahead of the United States in terms of their ability to manufacture those at scale, right? Now, he also mentioned that Beijing's purchases of Russian oil came up, but he didn't elaborate details. And remember, the president imposed sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil, Russian oil companies, that disrupted some energy exports to China and India. Now, of course, Putin has his own feelings on this. And Putin has said, for example, that he believes that he is winning, that he has completely encircled Pokrovsk, but there's still no evidence of this. As you can see on the map, there is still, by most accounts, an 8-kilometer wide sort of berth between the two narrowest points in the Pokrovsk encirclement. This is according to Deep State. Now, don't get me wrong. 8 kilometers can easily be crossed by FPV drones, and I would not want to be a Ukrainian trooper in sort of this pocket here. Because as we've talked about, the ability to conduct a withdrawal operation exceedingly difficult in a conventional battle. And in a space, a battlefield littered with FPV drones, conducting withdrawal is almost impossible. So, I actually think that in all likelihood, the Ukrainian forces cut off inside Pokrovsk probably going to have a very hard time of things. But again, according to Commander-in-Chief Alexander Syrskyi, Vladimir Putin's claims that both Pokrovsk and Kupiansk are encircled don't correspond to reality. But he continued at the same time, Pokrovsk enemy infantry, avoiding combat, accumulates in urban buildings and constantly changes its location. So it's about finding and destroying. So Putin also made this sort of preposterous offer that somehow Putin was going to have like a pause to allow journalists to verify that Ukrainian forces were encircled. But as we've talked about, the current state of war is that Putin is running an infiltration campaign, right? So you're not seeing, this isn't like a massed army. This isn't tanks in Pokrovsk. These are 200, 300 Russian soldiers sort of percolating, just sort of wandering, meandering really through the battlefields, looking for cover, trying to find a bunker, a basement, a grove of trees to dig into, and then remain there until Russian forces can advance and Ukrainian forces can be confirmed as having withdrawn. So I say all this, right, to sort of point out that these are not the actions of someone, ultimately Putin himself wants to continue fighting. And if both China and the U.S. were to say, hey, let's stop supporting both of these sides. One, China has shown, they say, we're neutral. We don't support one of the sides. We don't technically sell Russia munitions. We just sell them the component parts of munitions. And so China would love to see, again, what they always do, which is China goes, well, let's agree to do this thing. We'll both do thing X, and America, you can go first. And then America makes this real credible action, and China goes, okay, we also stopped. And then the U.S. goes, no, you don't. I can see. This is what happened with fentanyl, where the Chinese goes, okay. I think it was with Obama or Biden. China goes, okay, all right, guys, all right. We'll stop shipping fentanyl. You go first, though, America. Stop prosecuting our people for stealing your property. So America drops a bunch of prosecutions or whatever the deal was. And then China goes, well, that's it. We stopped shipping fentanyl. Good job. And the Biden administration goes, yeah, but you just shipped the two component parts to the cartels now. They just combine them in a warehouse. It takes them like 15 minutes. You haven't stopped shipping fentanyl. You've just slightly changed. You've just shipped it in two bags. And the Chinese go, well, sorry, this is the deal. And so that's what China's going to do with this. They're going to say, well, we also stopped supporting Russia. You stopped supporting Ukraine, right? We sent 0 weapons to Russia. And Trump will be like, yeah, you sure did, because he doesn't listen to experts on this sort of thing. And real experts will sit there and go, no, but the Chinese are still shipping them fiber optic cable. They're still buying their oil. They're still sending them like commercial goods. There's obvious overt support. And it's just another reflection of the naivete of, I think, the White House, that they even believe these sort of agreements are possible with the Chinese. But also, there is Vladimir Putin himself believes he is winning, right? He believes that this and honestly, as we've talked about, if this encirclement of Pokrovsk eliminates any meaningful portion of the Ukrainian armed forces, the fault lies 100% with Syrskyi and other commanders in the region, because there is absolutely 0 reason. This is the least surprising thing, right? You can see the encirclement of Pokrovsk, but look, take us back literally 2 months ago. There was still an effort to encircle Pokrovsk. Like, you had 2 months. I mean, look. 8 months ago, January 1st, still an obvious effort to create an encirclement of Pokrovsk via the south. It's so transparently obvious. We're talking about months and months and months that Ukrainian High Command had to deal with this. So, again, just the theme here, to the extent I want to understand the connection in these stories, is that you have this level of naivete that a lot of people are operating under, and the only people who seem to have a clear-eyed view of what is actually going on remain Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, 2 of the most experienced operators on the global stage. With over a decade between the 2 of them, they have something like almost 50 years of rule over their respective countries. Vladimir Putin with around 25, and Xi Jinping with 10, 15. So this, just understand that manipulating the latest American president is just par for the course for these veteran leaders. And again, the West's inability to respond remains deeply, deeply troubling. Anyway, guys, thanks to GMAT Club, Henry Roussier, James Porsche, Paul Peter Fucci, and all of our lieutenant tier members. Please check out strikecom.com. Embrace the sale, guys. I'll see you tomorrow. Cheers.